So we're looking at the agriculture bill. There's a lot in there, and there are a lot of measures, I'm guessing, that you will be campaigning for to protect the livelihoods and the conditions for local farmers. What will the bill mean, and what's your input to that?
Well, the important thing, the really important thing, I think, both for our consumers and for our farmers, is to maintain the current high standards that we have. Consumers want to keep those standards, and our farmers have invested an awful lot in order to come up to these really high welfare standards that we have, because we've been part of the EU. Now, the problem is the government wants to open the doors so that when they make trade deals, they can be pushed over and persuaded to accept substandard products, things which, for example, the chlorinated chicken we've all heard about, which means essentially you're trying to wash something in chlorine because it's basically filthy and the welfare standards are not as high in the States. So our farmers then, they're faced with the idea of things coming in that cost less to produce. Well, that's obviously going to be very, very fierce competition, and it's going to be very difficult for them to survive. So what I find absolutely extraordinary is that here we have a Conservative government which is not prepared to back our farmers, which is not prepared to back our consumers, and is prepared to basically roll over before they've even got into negotiations with any other countries and say, well, actually, if you want lower standards, we're the country you can send all your stuff to. So I'm very worried about that. I'm worried as well because there's another bill called the Internal Market Bill, and this is a bill which is actually going to undermine what Welsh Government can do. So where there are some opportunities for Welsh Government to make rules and regulations in respect of things like animal welfare and food standards, the present UK Government is trying to undermine that and trying to insist that we would have a situation where we effectively have to accept anything they accept in England. Now that, to me, again, it takes away the powers that we have in Wales, but it also, most fundamentally, undermines our farmers and our consumers.
We have a devolved a government that are powerless to resist, in effect. Can you see that sort of going on to becoming protests from farmers against anything like that?
Well, I think the difficulty is it's all quite a long way in the future in terms of what trade deals there might be. Certainly, the farmers' unions have been very vociferous. They've made their views known. The FUW and the NFU in Wales have both spoken out very clearly about this, and they've tried to lobby all MPs of all parties. Our hope now, strangely enough, is in the House of Lords, where the UK Internal Market Bill has gone now, and they're working very hard to try and get crossbench MPs, Lords on board, so that they can have a majority to push through some amendments. Now, let's hope that that's successful. However, when things come back to the Commons, will they just be undone, or will the government start listening?
You would think then, is this going to be sort of impact and affecting farmers across the UK, or is this just pertinent to Wales?
Well, it's certainly going to affect farmers across the UK, but our sector is, of course, so largely livestock, where it's arable farming, slightly different. Yes, of course, the poultry farms in East Anglia will be affected, but yes, here in Wales, we do have a particularly high percentage, which is obviously, beef, lamb, and poultry. We have very high welfare standards, and we want to maintain those.
Have there been any discussions relating to the future of farming and the way that it may be going now in the light of maybe a prolonged presence of COVID-19, the way in which farmers are working with the land, and we are maybe will be having to grow far more of our own crops and maybe having to increase the numbers and the workforce for farms. I know historically that's been difficult, hasn't it? We've relied on people from abroad coming in, people moving to the UK to work on farms, because it's never been a really attractive place to work, has it?
No, I mean, I think there are two difficulties. I think clearly, people want cheap food, and therefore it's been very, very difficult for farmers to offer very good wages. I mean, that's one of the big problems they have, and the other big problem, of course, is that it is sheer hard work. And unless you're very fit and up for it, it's not something that everybody can do. But certainly, I do think that the COVID situation has made us all rethink. It's made us think, should we be a lot more dependent on our own produce and not be so dependent on imports when perhaps communications won't be so good with other parts of the world, perhaps other countries will be affected by pandemics or whatever. So yes, let's have another look. Let's see how much more we can do with our own land here. And first and foremost, of course, let's make sure we keep the support in for the farmers, that when we come to the end of the transition period with the EU, that, of course, has to be renewed and has to be done by the UK government now. We need the support in that we've had up till now to make sure that we don't see any of our family farms go to the wall. So first and foremost, let's support the farming industry that we've got, and particularly, obviously, those who've been affected by the downturn in the restaurant trade, where, of course, the high quality products often go. And perhaps, let's make sure that we can boost the farms that need the help. We've seen, even with the milk industry, because people aren't having as many, corner shop coffees, their trade went down at the beginning and they needed extra support from Welsh Government. So there's a huge amount to do, but you're quite right. Let's see what else we can do. If I'm sure you know about Incredible Edible Carmarthenshire, which is the movement for trying to help people grow more food, use waste land, encourage community projects. I think the interest, and if you just go to any garden centre, has been absolutely phenomenal over the past few months, and people have become really interested again in doing what our grandparents and great-grandparents did.
Let's just look then at the additional COVID restrictions in Llanelli. They came in last month, late September. You have said you thanked the people of Llanelli for helping keep COVID under control in Llanelli. What's the situation at present? I mean, looking forwards again, we're hearing obviously that things aren't as bad in Carmarthenshire, but we still have these restrictions. Some people are questioning why, if hospitals aren't overflowing with people with COVID, what the demographics are of the people in there. Are they elderly people? Are they young people? And why we maybe can't go back to having these community hospitals like we had at Mynydd Mawr, where there is a specialist team dedicated just to looking after that, which then opens up the main hospitals and keeps that sort of system going.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's really important that people don't let up now. It's been a fantastic effort. We have managed to get the figures coming down, going in the right direction, but we know that there's so much COVID out there, it's very easy to have a surge again if we don't keep it well under control. And let's not demonize any particular group because, we've all got a responsibility. So I've been meeting regularly with the Health Board now. They've started having weekly meetings rather than fortnightly as we had over the summer because of the situation. The latest update they gave to the MPs and MSs on the call on Friday was that we have just 3 cases in Prince Philip Hospital, but we all know about the Royal Glamorgan, and we've also heard about the hospital in Gwent now as well. And we're only, a couple of hospitals down the motorway from them. So let's make sure that things are going in the right direction before we let up. The stats coming from across the country seem to show that the COVID has been pushing into the older age groups, and once, of course, that happens, we're more likely to see more hospitalisation. So I think what's important about what happened in Llanelli was that we did things very quickly. And I think it's where there have been delays that things have escalated and got a lot worse. So let's hope that we'll be able to come out of this local lockdown pretty quickly.
It is extremely sad, but sometimes worrying when you walk through Carmarthen and Llanelli and you see it almost like a ghost town with so many businesses closed. Is it your hope that things will open up again, that these people will come back, or do you think we will lose these businesses? It's been very tough times.
it's been really difficult, and I take my hat off to all the hospitality businesses who have been really trying to diversify, to do different things, takeaways instead of eat-in and all the rest of it, and the measures they've put in, the investment they've made to try and keep things clean and COVID free. But yes, we need to continue to support them. The Welsh Government has announced some more money to help in that respect. Now, what we're waiting to hear more detail on is exactly what we will be able to get in Wales as a result of the Chancellor's latest announcements, and how that might be used. But I think when people have built up a business, it's mad for us to let that go to the wall, because you might be talking about a dozen jobs that are already there. And every one of us, I'm sure, the minute we can go out more, we will want to go out more, because clearly there are so many celebrations that are waiting to happen, aren't there? But if we don't put the help in, those companies will fold, and it's infinitely more difficult to start up from scratch than to build on the expertise and the personnel that you've already got.
There's a lot more to it. There's the impact on domestic violence, there's the impact on child poverty, impact on homelessness. Let me go back to employment just for a moment, whereby we've been to Tracy Pike, we've seen what's happening down there with the hot desking, the way she's working with mothers, single parents, women especially. Do you think, knowing what we know now and looking towards the future, that we really do need to be, instead of waiting and just sort of seeing how things go and reacting, crisis management, do you think that we should really be formulating a long-term plan now, looking at identifying buildings whereby we can open them up to house people who can use that, a COVID-friendly building where people can start businesses up again, can hot desk, can share facilities, can have fantastic broadband? I mean, it is very difficult, even for working at home with people, children, terrible internet connection. There's a lot that needs to be done.
Yes, I think it certainly has shown us what we need to do for the future, because quite clearly, things are changing. And what's happened with the COVID, of course, is that things have gone online much more quickly than perhaps they were going to go anyway. So yes, I mean, the space that Tracy has in Syca in North Dock, where you can rent a desk, I mean, that is a way of the future. And as you say, with excellent facilities and internet connection and a bit of company, because anybody who's working on their own needs a bit of company as well to spark off. And what we're hoping to do with the Llanelli Railway Goods Shed, again, is something similar. Masses of space there, opportunity to have business startups, again, able to spark off each other. So yes, I think what is important is that we replace some of the socialization that we no longer have, because one or two people on a computer can run something that maybe 10-12 people had to do in person a few years ago, but they need the human interaction as well. And so by bringing some small businesses together to give them that opportunity, you're absolutely right, and people will have to rethink as well, why do we come into town? It's no longer going to be just for shopping. It's going to have to be much more for actual enterprise, for things that we actually have to do in person, or go and get in person, or have face-to-face contact with someone for, in order to make it a reason to be together and to be in town.
And just looking down towards Pembrokeshire and the issue of the asylum seekers, the migrants coming into Penarley there, you kind of upset, disturbed by the scenes there, people protesting?
I think it's really, really dreadful that people have protested in that way. They are absolutely not taking any notice of the local residents. Local residents themselves, of course, are thinking, well, what's happening here? We've got the asylum seekers arriving, but then they've had these awful protests, which have been really disturbing. So I think we all agree that an old army camp with quite cramped quarters is no way the sort of place where you want to house asylum seekers and give them the opportunity to be in sort of COVID compliant circumstances, and where there aren't any facilities. They need access, obviously, to lawyers to sort out their situation, and the Home Office backlog is such that the idea that it's going to be sorted out quickly is certainly not the case. Now, what we want to know is what went on with the Home Office in terms of communication with the Secretary of State, Simon Hart, who tells us that he didn't know, which I find quite extraordinary. And we also want to know what they mean by being there for a year, because what people don't want to see is this drift and drift. Now, that's not to say that anybody wishes to be in any way unfriendly to the people who are there. It's not their fault that they've ended up in this particular circumstance. And I know that many of the local people want to do as much as they can to help. But I think we all agree it isn't the best place. And, you know, we do have other parts of Wales where we do have systems set up ready to welcome and help people in these particular circumstances.
Just touching on the Llanelli rail crash, what's the latest update there in Llangennec and with Network Rail for that line?
Well, as you know, there's been the interim report, which was quite worrying, really, because it did highlight the similar problem to back in 2017. And you wonder, well, what's been going on since? So there are definitely questions to ask there about the maintenance of the braking system on those wagons. But we can't really do anything about that until we have the final report. And then we'll be in a position, obviously, to pursue that. And I certainly will be pursuing that very vigorously. On the environment, the agencies have been working together, and we are obviously hoping that we will have a bit more news for people on exactly what the impact has been across the bay in the very near future.
Do you think that, certainly in Carmarthenshire, we've had Kevin Mudge, he's mentioned this lack of scrutiny at Carmarthenshire County Council, no committee meetings taking place online either. Does that worry you? Does that concern you that this authority is at present sort of running with a 10-person team as a gold command? Or I know it's difficult to be critical again because, you know, people are doing things under extremely difficult circumstances, but the scrutiny is what Kevin is saying is very worrying.
Yes, I am very worried. I mean, look, first of all, let's be clear. You know, the officers are working hard, but I do think that needs to be shared with the elected members. The councillors are, at the end of the day, our representatives. And it has worried me that it does seem to have taken quite a while to get any council meetings at all running. And then, as you say, there seems to be a lack of the scrutiny committee meetings when there's an opportunity to say, are we getting the best value for money? Is this the best way of doing things? Would there be other things that we could be doing as well? You know, it's not simply about criticising, it can be about being constructive. And those councillors have to report back to us. Now, if they're not getting a chance to question officers, I am worried. We can all of us do with extra advice on how to do things better. And, you know, what about this? And did you check up on that? You know, and I don't think anyone should be exempt, even in an emergency. And the longer it goes on, the more important it is to get these processes back up and running effectively.
Obviously, Keir Starmer has been in place now for a little while. How is he performing?
Well, I think the important thing initially is to do the right thing for the country. And you know, to try to be as supportive as we can of the government, but to be critical where we feel that they're failing. And so I think he certainly made an impact. I think people have got to know his name. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a long way to go in terms of rebuilding trust. And certainly it will be quite some considerable time, I think, before people will be confident about the whole of the Labour Party and will be able to get to know all of our front bench team.
The Queen's Birthday Honours List has been announced. A lot of Welsh recipients, a lot of people within the health and social care industry, and also your friend George Parker. What are your views?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted that George has got the MBE in the Queen's Honours List. Of course, I know him from the work he does on the Llanelli Railway Goods Shed and the way he's helped us with the project, and even to being incredibly practical about getting lots of jobs done around the site and negotiating with Network Rail and so forth. But I know that that's just one of many different organisations that he's been involved with, both now in the present and over the years. And it's not just a passing commitment with him. You know, it will be time and time again. He will suggest ideas. He will come up with initiatives, like, for example, the memorial service that we held for railway men who lost their lives in the First World War. You know, he put in the effort. So it's not just about turning up to the odd meeting or giving a bit of money. It's actually that personal interest in getting things done for the community.